I'm Serenity and this is my channel, and today we're joined here by Ginger, Nebula, and Nebula is so big that you can't see Nova behind her. And welcome back to another Holiday Misconducts. I know I've been gone for a while, I'll get into it in a second. Today we're going to be discussing Mother's Day, which I know was a while back. I'll explain it in a minute. And a case that is truly horrifying about a woman who grooms 3 teenagers into killing her spouse over insurance money, which is like the classic insurance money trope in true crime that we see all the time. Before we go any further, I do want to mention there are timestamps down below. Skip around if you want. As always, I do recommend stopping at the trigger warnings so you know what you're getting yourself into. So, let's get into it. Holiday Misconducts is a series on my channel where I talk about major holidays that have some sort of significant crime that happened on that day, the major holiday, the history behind the holiday, and then the crimes that were committed. So today we're talking about Mother's Day, the history, and a few crimes that happened on the holiday. Now, before we begin, and before I talk a little bit more about the case, before we actually get into it, I do want to give a few trigger warnings for the following: murder, grooming, inappropriate relationships, gun violence, a plot to kill a spouse over insurance money, and mentions of drugs. So, like I said earlier, May has been really wacky for me. I've been really out of sorts. It just wasn't going to plan. One of the reasons was that I've been dealing with really bad writer's block. There's 2 cases, this case and next week's case, that I can't get through or can't build up the courage. I don't know what to write. It's been a mess. And also I've been dealing with severe insomnia. I'm sleeping 3 hours a day. So with that, because I'm going to sleep at like 3 a.m. every night, randomly I just thought on to look up Father's Day crimes for June, see if there was any crimes committed on Father's Day for Holiday Misconducts, and you'll see if there is one that I will be covering. But then I'm like, if Father's Day has one, what about Mother's Day? And I googled it and there was one. So this was actually like the Wednesday before Mother's Day happened. I think it was on March 12th this year of 2023. So there was really no time for me to research the case, write a script, film it, upload it, everything. It was literally Wednesday and my videos go up on Thursday. So this video was going to be late either way. But it was such an interesting case that I couldn't just put it on a list and cover next year. So you're getting it a couple weeks late. It's still very interesting. With that being said, there actually is an ID episode on this case that I could not find to watch. It was behind a paywall and I wasn't going to pay for it. Plus it was one of those reenacting true crime episodes and I'm not really a fan of those. I think they really take away the humanity in these cases. There also is a book, and the book is what I found on this case specifically. And the book, in hindsight, there was no time for me to order the book. It said it would get here in 2-3 weeks. And then read the book. It would have taken me like 4 hours. It's only 300 pages. Read the book, take notes on the book, write the script, do the whole editing process because it wouldn't get here in time. Now, hindsight that this is coming out much later than I thought it would, I could have done it, but I also, in those types of books, I don't like to read them on my Kindle because I can get it like this, but I don't like that. I either need a physical copy to take notes in or I need to listen to it on an audiobook. And there was like one retailer who sold the book. Couldn't find it. I did use some Spark Notes on it to write this case, this script. So with all that being said, buckle up, grab a blanket, a snack, a drink, and let's get into the case. So as many of you know, Mother's Day is a holiday honoring motherhood that is observed on different days in different forms throughout the world. In the United States of America, where I live, Mother's Day often falls on a Sunday in May. The American incarnation of Mother's Day was created by a woman named Anna Jarvis in 1908 and became an official US holiday in 1914. Anna Jarvis would later denounce the holiday because it was so commercialized and spent the later part of her year trying to remove it from the calendar. Basically, she didn't like how big corporations tried to capitalize on this new holiday to sell crap to form a bigger profit for their company. Valid. In the UK and all Commonwealth countries such as Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, Mother's Day is always celebrated on the 4th Sunday during Lent, which is 3 Sundays before Easter, tying it into the church's calendar. Now, I spoke about Easter in my last Holiday Misconduct if you want to go check that one out. England's history with this holiday has its origins originating in the 16th century of the custom of Mothering Sunday. In Mexico, Mother's Day is called Dia de las Madres, which can be traced back to 1913 when a wife of a Methodist priest found a magazine where the celebration was discussed as it emerged in the US, and she decided to take that idea. According to government officials, May was chosen in Mexico because it is the month of the Virgin Mary, and because in the past, the 10th of each month, the 10th day, was the monthly payday in Mexico as opposed to the 15th that the monthly payday is in Mexico today. The 10th was chosen so Mexican families can always have money to spend on a celebration, which is another form of capitalism. Mexico was also the first Latin American country to officially recognize Mother's Day as a federal holiday. Then on May 10th, 1949, the government built a sculpture in Mexico City to celebrate all mothers. No matter what day of the week, Dia de las Madres will always be celebrated on the 10th. There is a bunch of other countries that celebrate some variations of the holiday, but if I went into detail over every single one of them, I'd be here forever. Celebrations of mothers and motherhood can be traced back to the ancient Greeks and Romans, who held festivals in honor of the mother goddesses Rhea and Cybele, but the clearest modern precedent for Mother's Day in the early Christian festivities known as Mothering Sunday, like I mentioned. Now, we all know about the countries that celebrate the holiday, so I want to jump back into the very interesting history of how the holiday actually came to be in the state. In the 19th century, in the years before Civil War, a woman named Anna Reeves Jarvis from West Virginia helped start something called Mother's Day Work Clubs to teach local women how to properly care for their children. These clubs later became a unifying force in a region of the country still divided over the Civil War. In 1868, Anna Reeves organized an event called Mother's Friendship Day, at which mothers gathered with former Union and Confederate soldiers to promote reconciliation. Another persecutor to Mother's Day from the abolitionist and suffragette Julia Ward Howe. In 1870, Julia wrote the Mother's Day Proclamation, which was a call to action that asked mothers to unite in promoting world peace. In 1873, Julia campaigned for a Mother's Peace Day to be celebrated on every June 2nd. Other early Mother's Day pioneers include Juliet Calhoun Blakely, a temperance activist who inspired a local Mother's Day in Albion, Michigan in the 1870s. The duo of Mary Towles Susan and Frank Herring organized a Mother's Day in the late 19th century and early 20th century. Some have even called Herring the father of Mother's Day. The official Mother's Day holiday arose in the 1900s as a result of the efforts of Anne Jarvis, the daughter of Anne Reeves Jarvis. Following her mother's death in 1905, Anne Jarvis conceived of Mother's Day as a way of honoring sacrifices mothers made for their children. After gaining financial backing from a Philadelphia department store owner named John Wanamaker in May of 1908, she organized the first official Mother's Day celebration at a Methodist church in Grafton, West Virginia. The same day also saw thousands of people attend a Mother's Day event at one of Wanamaker's retail stores in Philadelphia. Following the success of her first Mother's Day, Anne Jarvis, who actually remained unmarried and childless her whole life, which is pretty badass in my opinion, resolved to see her holiday added to the national calendar. Arguing that American holidays were biased towards male achievements, she started a massive letter writing campaign to newspapers and prominent politicians urging the adoption of a special day honoring motherhood. By 1912, many states, towns, and churches had adopted Mother's Day as an annual holiday, and Anne had established the Mother's Day International Association to help promote her cause. Her persistence paid off in 1914 when President Woodrow Wilson signed a measure officially establishing the second Sunday in May as Mother's Day every year. Anna Jarvis had originally conceived of Mother's Day as a holiday, as a day of celebration between moms and families. Her version of the day involved wearing white carnation flowers as a lapel badge and visiting one's mother or attending church services. However, once Mother's Day became a national holiday on the calendar, it was not long before florists, card companies, and other merchants capitalized on its popularity. While Anne Jarvis had initially worked with the floral industry to help raise Mother's Day's profile, by 1920, she had become disgusted with how the holiday had been commercialized. She outwardly denounced the transformation and urged people to stop buying Mother's Day flowers, cards, and candies. She eventually resorted to an open campaign against Mother's Day profiteers, speaking out against confectioners, florists, and even charities. She also launched countless lawsuits against the group that used the name Mother's Day, eventually spending most of her personal money in legal fees. By the time of her death in 1948, Anne Jarvis had disowned the holiday altogether and even actively lobbied against the government to see it removed from the American calendar. In the United States, Mother's Day continues to be celebrated by presenting mothers and other women with gifts and flowers, and it has become one of the biggest holidays for consumer spending, much to Anne Jarvis's wishes. Families also celebrate by giving mothers a day off from activities such as cooking or other household chores, which is like just a day off in the whole year. Come on, that's kind of lazy. At times, Mother's Day has also been a date for launching political or feminist causes. In 1968, Coretta Scott King, wife of Martin Luther King Jr., used Mother's Day to host a march in support of underprivileged women and children. In the 1970s, women's groups also used the holiday as a time to highlight the need need for equal rights and access to childcare. It's very interesting to see the way Mother's Day came out of a feminist movement and is used to launch women's centered causes to this day. So now let's get into today's case. This case is over 25 years old, so some details are very limited, so bear with me. Kevin Spann was born in 1962. Little is known about his life before he met his wife and ultimate demise, but what I do know is that he was part of the Army. He actually held the rank of Staff Sergeant. My educated guess is that he joined the Army when he graduated high school and worked his way up to the level 6 rank he was actually in. In 1989, Kevin met a woman named Gina Lynn Spears in her Illinois hometown. I don't know what this town was, but it was in Illinois. If I make an educated guess again, Kevin had to have lived near an Army base, and from what I can research, there are many Army bases in Illinois, but the largest one is Rock Island Arsenal Army Base in Arsenal Island, Illinois. So maybe that's where he lived. There isn't much known about Gina's life before Kevin, but she did have a 2-year-old son from a previous marriage, and the child's name was Stephen Hill. Gina and Kevin got married in 1989, soon after meeting, and he became the stepfather to Gina's son. She was 23 and he was 27, which means Gina had her son at 21. In 1990, soon after they got married, the couple moved to Fort Worth, Texas, which is an Army area outside of Dallas, Texas. About a year into their marriage, Kevin was deployed to Kuwait, a country in the Middle East, in support of the Operation Desert Storm. Gina was unable to handle being alone, so she went back to her hometown in Illinois. After Kevin returned home from Kuwait, he went to Illinois to see if Gina would go with him to Fort Gordon, Georgia. Fort Gordon is a few minutes southeast of Augusta, Georgia. Kevin worked as a supervisor in Company D's Signal Baton 442 at Fort Gordon. Gina agreed to the move, and during a stay in Germany, Kevin Spann had purchased 2 life insurance policies, one for $200,000 named to Gina Spann as beneficiary and Stephen Hill, his stepson, as the alternate beneficiary, and then the other for $100,000 was named to Gina Spann and then her sister Betty Jo Spears. Some reports say that Gina did live in Germany with Kevin during this time. I just don't know if it's true or how accurate it is. Things were going well between the couple, but that was until Kevin started to work long hours. Kevin suggested that Gina got a part-time job to help occupy her time. That would be the worst decision of Kevin's life. 31-year-old then, at that time, Gina got a job at a local Taco Bell in Augusta, Georgia. While working at this job, Gina met a 17-year-old boy named Larry Wayne Kelly. Here is where conflicting reports come in, but some say she also met 2 more teenagers while working there. I don't know if this is true or if the other teenage boys were just friends of Larry's but didn't also work at the Taco Bell. It's not a huge detail, but I felt that I should mention it in case you're wondering. Anyways, Gina became friends with Larry and 3 more boys: 16-year-old Matthew Clark Pizzazzi, 18-year-old Gerald Lewis Horn, 16-year-old Christopher Lee Barringen. The 5 became fast friends despite the obvious 13 to 15-year age gap between Gina and the boys and the fact that they were all minors. Never mind that they were minors, which is completely inappropriate. So I'm just going to chalk this up to being 25 years ago. So as we know now, as we've known for the past couple of years, these type of relationships are extremely inappropriate, but they were not called out as much back during that time. In fact, the articles I was reading never even pointed this out, how odd it was. And essentially, it's grooming. So Gina became popular amongst the teenagers when they realized that she could buy them alcohol. They all started partying together at hotels after work, and eventually Gina started sleeping with one of them, Larry Kelly to be exact. After a while, Gina just moved the parties to her marital home, the one she shared with her husband Kevin and her son Stephen. Kevin would come home from a long day of work and find drunk and passed out underage kids all over his home. Gina also did not hide the fact that she was sleeping with one of the teenagers, Larry, essentially having an affair in her own house. She did not care how Kevin actually felt about it or that she was actively cheating on her husband in their own house. Then one day, Larry's stepfather kicked him out of the house. Because Larry didn't know where else to turn, he turned to Gina, who agreed to let him move in with them without asking Kevin if he was okay with it. She brought an underage 17-year-old child into her home where she lived with her husband and her own teenage son. That's not it though. It gets worse. Not only did Larry move into the house, but he moved into the marital bedroom, the master bedroom, where Gina usually would sleep with her husband Kevin. But Gina and Larry started sharing a bed, the marital bed. In return, Kevin moved out of the room and slept in another room in the same house, the back room to be exact. Larry and Gina shared the master bedroom, flaunting their love in front of Kevin. I say love with air quotes because in my mind, it wasn't love. It was maybe infatuation, but definitely not love, especially when in my head, this is a grooming situation that is happening here. And at the very least, there are power imbalances in this relationship. At this point, the calculation doesn't really make sense, but some reports say the Spanns had been married for 11 years, but for my math, it was more like 8 years. In the spring of 1997, Kevin had finally had enough of Gina's behavior and asked for a divorce. However, Gina had begged Kevin to make the marriage work, and she promised him she would change her ways. She knew that if Kevin divorced her, she would be left with nothing to her name. He was the main breadwinner. Kevin Spann had loved Gina and did want to actually make the marriage work, so he agreed to try again, but he insisted that Larry had to get out of his house within 1 week of their agreement. But that didn't really bode well in Gina's eyes. Instead of doing the one thing that her husband asked of her in order to try and salvage their relationship, she chose to do something sinister instead. Gina enlisted Larry, her lover, and 3 of his friends in a plot to murder her husband and cash in on the $300,000 life insurance policy, which she was the main beneficiary of. On Saturday, May 10th, 1997, the eve of Mother's Day, the first assassination attempt to end Kevin's life failed. After botching the first attempt Saturday night, 2 of the teens went back to the Fort Gordon Soldiers' house on Mother's Day. On May 11th, 1997, the 2 teenagers knocked on the Spann's front door for the second time in 2 days, and when Kevin opened the door, they shot him point blank in the face and once in the chest, around his torso area. As his killers left, Kevin was still alive and breathing, but it wouldn't be for long, and he would soon bleed out. As Kevin Spann passed away from blood loss, his 2 assassins walked away, casually as if they never did anything. Gina would arrive home a few hours later to find her house's front door opened, with Kevin laying lifeless on the ground in a pool of his own blood. Kevin Leroy Spann was only 35 years old when he was pronounced unalive at 11:40 p.m. on Mother's Day in the doorway of his own house. Police arrived on the scene, and Kevin's body was taken to the Richmond County Deputy Coroner Grover Tutton, where it was confirmed his cause of death was actually 2 gunshot wounds and excessive blood loss. He probably would have been fine if he had gotten immediate help. Within 24 hours, police uncovered the real motive of Kevin's death. Investigators zeroed in on Gina and her band of teenage friends. On May 12, 1997, just a day after Kevin's unalivement, police arrested multiple people. 16-year-old Matthew Clark Piazzi, Happenson High School 9th grader who recently dropped out of school and was arrested that Monday, the 12th, charged with shooting Kevin Spann. 31-year-old Gina Lynn Spann and her live-in boyfriend, now 18-year-old Larry Wayne Kelly, along with 18-year-old Gerald Lewis Horn and 16-year-old Christopher Lee Barrington, also were arrested on that Monday, each charged with being a party to the crime of murder. According to Chief Deputy Ronald Strength of the Richmond County Sheriff's Department, he said this about the arrest, and I quote, "The motive was 2 life insurance policies on Mr. Spann's life totaling $300,000 that Mrs. Spann was the beneficiary of. The following information about this case was released to the public. According to police, Gina Spann and Larry Kelly were living in the same house with Kevin Spann. I'll get back to the press release in a minute, but that's information we already knew. Police began interrogating the 4 suspects. During her questioning, Gina told police that she was not employed, nor was Larry Kelly, who was an 11th grader at Butler High School, which unless they both quit their jobs at the Taco Bell, as I said, we know the pair met while working there, this information is probably wrong. Or they quit once they started living together, and Kevin was bankrolling their little love affair. Through the investigation, police discovered that Gina had plotted to end Kevin's life. They were unable to find out right away how long Gina actually had been plotting to end her husband's life with the help of Larry. Police did discover that once the decision to kill Kevin Spann was made, Larry Kelly called his friend Christopher Barrington, a 9th grader in high school, and he referred them to Matthew Piazzi and Gerald Horn. Police said this on the information they discovered, and I quote, "They were both Mr. Horn and Mr. Piazzi offered $5,000 to be paid when the insurance money was received," Chief Deputy Strength said. The pair didn't receive the money up front though, obviously, because Gina didn't have it, the officer said. Matthew Piazzi and Gerald Horn went to the Spann's house on Saturday to kill Kevin Spann, but he actually never came to the door, so they stole his car and shot into a window, police said. And I quote, "No crime juveniles commit surprises me anymore because they have access to weapons and use them." Gina Spann had the time to change her mind. Matthew Piazzi and Gerald Horn took Kevin Spann's car to make it look like a robbery or a burglary, police claimed. The car was found on Pearl Avenue and Brown Road early Monday morning, right before their arrest. On both nights, Gina and Larry took Gina's 12-year-old son, a literal child, and went out while they waited for the killing to take place, police discovered. On both nights of the plan, Gina and Larry picked up Matthew and Gerald at the Royal Palms Motel on Peach Orchard Road and dropped them off at the Spann's house, police uncovered. When Mother's Day first came around, Matthew and Gerald knocked on the Spann's front door. Kevin answered the door when Matthew fired twice from not more than 3 feet away, hitting Kevin once in his chest and once in his cheek, according to the press release. At about about 10:45 p.m. on that Sunday, Gina Spann called police from a neighbor's home and said her husband had been killed and was lying in the living room near the front door. Investigators said the following on the press release, and I quote, "We questioned both of them, Mrs. Spann and Mr. Kelly, separately and found that there were too many inconsistencies in their statements," Chief Deputy Strain said. At first, the lovers actually provided each other with alibis when investigators questioned their whereabouts, although Larry also told police that he was Gina's live-in boyfriend, which piqued investigators' interest and made the couple the #1 prime suspects, which is obvious. Gina admittedly denied any involvement in the shooting, but Larry, on the other hand, folded real quickly and told investigators everything. He told them that Gina asked him to find someone to shoot her husband, so he did, simple as that. He found Matthew Piazzi and Gerald Horn to do the job. Investigators would learn that Gina devised a plan and told the teenagers what to do. The interrogations led police to Matthew Piazzi, Gerald Horn, and Christopher Burrington. At about 5 a.m. on Monday, May 12th, Matthew Piazzi and Gerald Horn were arrested without incident at the Royal Palms Motel. They were being held without bond at the Youth Detention Center that very evening. Matthew Piazzi was then charged with murder and possession of a firearm during the commission of a crime. He then led police to a .38 caliber gun hidden in a field near a Marco Polymer. Police said that was the weapon used to end Kevin Spann's life. They did not know yet whom the gun belonged to or where the boys got it, but it did have no serial number, so they think it actually belonged to one of the boys' parents. Matthew Piazzi's father, Richard Piazzi, said his son went to the Hepatitis High for the first semester of 9th grade, but no longer attends, and they were homeschooling him. He said he had seen Gerald Horn before and told his son he didn't want him hanging out around that boy because he didn't like the way he looked. He said this, and I quote, "I thought he had stopped hanging out with them. I don't know what happened yet, but I would hate to think that he did something like that." When asked if his son could have killed Kevin Spann, he said, "Something went wrong. I don't know what happened yet, but it didn't sound right that all of these boys would be hanging around that woman." Is that not the truest statement in this case so far? On May 24th, 1997, just 2 weeks after the murder, a news article came out in the Augustus Chronicle claiming that 3 other young boys had actually come forward to police claiming that Gina Lynn Spann asked them to kill her husband. Their names were 20-year-old Michael Kelly, the older brother of Gina Spann's teenage boyfriend. According to Michael, Gina had lured his brother Larry and 3 other teens into a plot to slay her husband by manipulating them with drugs and sex, amongst other things. Now, I don't know if she was sleeping with all these boys or if it was just Larry, but according to this article, it sounds like it was all boys. At this point, more information was being released on the case. Police revealed the following. According to them, Gerald was with Matthew when he pulled the trigger, but it was Gina's idea, and Christopher and Larry helped her devise the assassination plan. Michael Kelly said this about Gina, and I quote, "She asked me to do it in the beginning of January. She said she had this idea to get her husband out of the way. I told her I was trying to stay out of trouble." Michael told officials that he was in jail once for a misdemeanor of disorderly conduct charge, and he knew he actually never wanted to go back to that place. Police would not reveal the identities of the other 2 people who said Gina Spann had also asked them to kill her husband, but they were area residents ages 17 and 18 years old. Sheriff Deputy Ronald Strain said this, and I quote, "We have no reason to believe that those statements were received from them are inaccurate." Michael Kelly said he met Gina Spann in 1996 when she went to work at the Taco Bell on Peach Orchard Road as a manager where he was already working there. He said this, and I quote, "I trained her as a crew member when she first started." Then Michael Kelly said he got his brother Larry a job there, and Larry started hanging out with Gina Spann after work. And 2 weeks later, in about December of 1996, Larry Kelly moved in with her. Michael Spann said, and I quote, "He had been living from friend to friend since from June of 1996 when he moved from home because of problems we were having with our stepfather. That's one of the reasons," Michael Kelly said, "he and his brother were both high school dropouts." And I quote, "It's hard to try to work and live on your own and go to school. It gets frustrating. And at the school, they just give up on us after we get in a little trouble. But we were both trying to get on the right track and finish school." When asked about why his brother would live with Gina Spann and why he was interested, Michael Kelly said, and I quote, "I think he thought he was in love with her. I think the fact that she was older and could get him stuff he couldn't get, like drugs, and she was actively sleeping with him, and it was just a place to stay." Michael said Gina was a mother figure to many of the teens who actually worked at that Taco Bell. When they had problems, some felt like they could actually talk to her and she wouldn't judge them. and I quote, "She seemed cool at first, but not anymore. He said Larry never used drugs before he met Gina Spann." And I quote, "She was giving him and the other boys acid, alcohol, and marijuana." Michael Kelly claimed Gina Spann had invited him to her house. She said she and her husband had an open marriage, and that if I was there when he woke up in the morning, he would just step over me and everybody else, that he was used to it. Police said that the Spanns were separated, but Kevin was living in the back room of the house because he was actually having financial problems. Police confirmed that the gun they believed to have killed Kevin Spann belonged to Kelly's stepfather, David Best. Larry Kelly, Gerald Horne, and Michael Piazzi had also been questioned about the recent burglary at South Augusta home of actually Kelly's parents. So Kelly and Gina Spann picked up Gerald Horne and Matthew Piazzi on Saturday, May 10th, to drop them off at the Spann house where they tried to end Kevin's life the first time, but he just wouldn't come to answer the door, like I mentioned earlier. Then the next day, when they picked the boys up again at the motel and dropped them off, and they succeeded in gunning down Kevin Spann, Michael Kelly says he wonders if both boys were actually on drugs at the time they committed the crime, and if the drugs had something to do with why they were involved in the first place. And I quote, "I think she just kept getting them high until they were in the right state of mind, an altered state. When you're high, you get the feeling that you can't get caught and you feel invincible." Police said several people they had interviewed had told them Gina Spann had provided drugs to the young teenagers she was hanging around, including the suspects in her husband's death. But police claim when the teens were arrested several hours after the killing, they were not high on any substance. Now, I don't know if they actually administered a drug test or not, so that could have given us an answer. Michael Kelly said the following on the case, and I quote, "They are all old enough to know better, but they're still kids, very impressionable. I think my brother deserves to do some time for his role so he can learn a lesson. He's young. I hope he will still get out and have enough time to live a good life and do things right. I think she deserves the electric chair. She messed up 5 lives, including her son's, because now he doesn't have a mother or father." On November 21st of 1997, 31-year-old Gina Spann pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and will now spend the rest of her life behind bars. She could have been sentenced to death if convicted of murder in Richmond County Supreme Court. However, on that Friday, she admitted her guilt and pleaded guilty to malice murder and use of a firearm during a commission of a crime, taking a deal where she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 5 years on top of it, meaning she's gonna perish away in there. Gina Spann pleaded guilty and admitted she caused or directed another person to commit the May 11 slayings of 35-year-old Army Staff Sergeant Kevin Leroy Spann at his old Waynesboro Road home. She actually only agreed to plead guilty once she realized her lover, Larry, was facing the death penalty. In exchange for her plea, she asked for the death penalty to be taken off the table for both her and Larry. Investigators contended the killing was Gina Spann's idea because she wanted Kevin's $300,000 from his life insurance policies that covered her husband. Actually, initially, investigators searched Gina's car and found a $3,000 life insurance policy for Kevin Spann, which gave them the evidence they needed to charge her with murder, like one of those receipts of purchase sort of thing. So in finding that receipt, they were able to charge her with murder according to the agreement. As part of Gina Spann's plea agreement, District Attorney Dan Craig did not seek the death penalty against Larry Kelly, her lover. Gina Spann was also expected to testify truthfully at the other teenagers' trials, according to the agreement. Christopher Barrington, Matthew Piazzi, and Gerald Horne's trials were set to begin on December 1st, 1997. Christopher Bigatti's case was separated from the other 2 defendants because he filed a request for a speedy trial. Only he was expected to stand trial that week. He also was representing himself on the murder charges instead of taking a public defender. After all 3 trials were wrapped up, now 19-year-old Larry Kelly was tried and convicted of first-degree murder. He received a life sentence plus 5 years. He tried twice to carry out Gina Spann's murder plot so she could collect the $300,000 in life insurance policies that the Parisian Gulf War veteran had. 17-year-old Matthew Piazzi pleaded guilty to murder and was sentenced a life sentence. He was the triggerman who ended up killing Staff Sergeant Spann the night of the murder. 18-year-old Gerald Horne pleaded guilty and was sentenced to a life sentence. He was present when the soldier was gunned down. He was the second person there on his front porch. 18-year-old Christopher Barrington pleaded guilty to conspiracy and received 5 years in prison, followed by a 5-year probationary sentence. He failed, along with Larry Kelly, to end Kevin Spann's life, but he did find Matthew Piazzi and Gerald Horne to do the slaying. On February 16, 1998, 3 months after taking a life without parole prison sentence to spare herself and her boyfriend possible death sentences, Gina Spann was back in court with a legal argument that her sentence was actually too harsh. When Gina Spann, who was now 32 at the time, pleaded guilty to murder and the use of a firearm during the commission of a crime on November 21st, 1997, she admitted to taking part in the May 11 slaying of her husband. Specifically, she admitted to directing 3 teenage boys to kill her husband. The plea agreement spared Gina Spann from a death penalty trial in Richmond County Superior Court, which which I've all mentioned earlier. Judge Beryl J. Mulher Sr. was presented a defense motion to modify Gina Spann's sentence of life without parole. Defense attorneys Maureen Floyd and Richard Inkman protested the hearing, contending the motion wasn't ready to be heard. The motion was filed in case the General Assembly or court someday decided that the life without parole sentence was unconstitutional and should be abolished. If that happens, then Gina Spann should be allowed to challenge her sentence, Mr. Agram said. District Attorney Danny Craig argued against allowing the motion to remain in limbo, awaiting some change in the law. Gina Spann's plea negotiation specifically states that she was giving up her right to any appeal, and that if she did attempt to challenge her conviction and her sentence, then the plea deal was off, and she could stand trial on capital murder charges facing the death penalty. It would be unfair to the public to allow the motion to just sit there in limbo, possibly for years, decades. While prosecution cases weakened with age, Mr. Craig said he asked the judge to either dismiss the motion to nullify Gina Spann's plea and sentence and allow the state to try her for the death penalty. Judge Mueller dismissed the motion, explaining that it was just a moot point. If it's decided someday that life without parole is unconstitutionally harsh, then the sentence Gina Spann received and any other prisoner serving a life sentence without parole would automatically become life with the possibility of parole, so there wouldn't be a need for another trial, Judge Mullenher announced. I found this funeral website that had the following information, which I don't know how true it actually is, so take this last part with a grain of salt. Apparently, Kevin Spann had a child from an earlier relationship. He had never acknowledged the child named Crystal Altimer as his daughter, but DNA testing after his death did confirm that he was her father. English American common law makes it clear that a murderer may not profit from his or her actions. In other words, under both Illinois and Georgia law, Gina Spann was precluded from receiving any benefit from the life insurance contract. Both were states that the Spanns had lived over the course of their relationship. Both states' law worked the same way. The life insurance proceeds would be paid if Gina Spann had predeceased her husband. Some states go even further and preclude the murderer's family members from any benefit unless they are also family of the victim. On the theory that the murderer might deprive some indirect benefit from the money or might even be motivated to commit the murder to help family members, Georgia, for example, precludes both the murderer and his or her family from inheriting under a will, though it does not take the same position with regard to life insurance proceeds. So the child, who was Kevin's long-lost daughter, Crystal Altimer, mother made the argument that Illinois law should apply and that it would preclude Gina Spann's son or sister from receiving the insurance proceeds. The 7th Circuit of the U.S. Court of Appeals agreed that Illinois law controlled, but disagreed about how the law should be interpreted. The court noted that Illinois law was not clear on the question of disinheriting family members of the murderer. In fact, said the judges, it is fairly easy to imagine a scenario where it would be necessary to prevent a family member from receiving insurance proceeds as an inheritance. Such might be the case if Stephen Hill, Gina's son, and Kevin's stepson, who Kevin had raised basically all of Stephen's life, promised to use the proceeds to provide a legal defense for his mother. So then the money that would only be inherited when Kevin passed, the murderer would still get a portion of that money, the second in command. Does that make sense? Or support her when she was released from prison. Stephen Hill, however, apparently lives with his aunt and has no contact with his mother even to this day. And the aunt is the second beneficiary on the other one of those wills. There was little prospect of Gina Spann receiving any benefit from the proceeds of the life insurance policy, so they should have just been paid to the alternate beneficiaries of Kevin's policy, Gina Spann's sister, Betty Jo Pierce, or her son, Stephen Hill, which, like I said, it's believed that they both live together now, or they did. Obviously, Stephen is now an adult. The court also noted that Kevin Spann's relationship, or better, lack of relationship with his daughter, is irrelevant to this determination, which obviously I agree with, because if this is a child of his, but he never really acknowledged the child, she shouldn't really benefit from his life insurance policy, because technically that's just an illegitimate child in the court of law. The lawsuit and information on this can be found in Prudence Insurance versus Altimer and Hill of May 14, 1999. I don't know who ended up with the life insurance money or if anyone actually ended up with it. That is in fact the one question I really want answered. From what I can gather, all the people in this case are still alive, and all of them but Christopher are still behind bars serving their life sentences without parole. Now, can I just say $5,000 in order to end someone's life is nothing. $10,000 if it was $5,000 to each of the people who ended the life is nothing, and a fraction of $300,000. That's a lot of money, but also $300,000 is not enough money money to sustain you for the rest of your life without working. So the whole plot to end her husband's life over money is really pointless, because eventually down the line, if she gets away with it, she would have had to start working again. 300K is nothing if you're only 31 and you're gonna live to be 80. So let me know your thoughts and opinions on this case down below. It's another one where no one had to die. Really, it was just a selfish person in the end. Let me know your thoughts and opinions. If you have any recommendations on cases I should cover, let me know down below too. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Turn on the post notifications if you want. I don't even know if it does anything, if I'm being honest. I know like some of you have them on. I don't know. But for sure, June, you guys are gonna get consistent uploads, and hopefully if I can work it out, there will be 2 Tuesday videos that are not true crime related. They are something else. Alright, the doggo picture of the day, as always, as a palette cleanser, is this picture of Nova cuddling with the Squishymallows, because my god, that girl loves a good pillow and a good nap. Love you, Mina kisses, don't do things stupid, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye!